Should the Baltimore Ravens trade for DJ Moore? We talk about that and more next year on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And we are back here with another episode of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens Wire. We're here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for tuning in today, making us your first listen of the day. We're free and available on all platforms. That also includes over in video form on YouTube. And this podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp. It's not a crisis line. It's not self-help. It's professional therapy done securely online, available to people worldwide. And they have a special offer for listeners. Get 10% off your first month at BetterHelp.com/locked on. We are back here, a midweek edition of the show here on Wednesday, creeping up to that Week 6 matchup with the New York Giants, a big one, the Greg Roman versus Don Martindale chess match. Everybody's been waiting to see that chess match, so we'll be talking about that throughout the remainder of the week. But I do want to get into a couple of different things here today. In the first segment, the Ravens officially did place Marcus Williams, a safety, on IR yesterday. So just talking a bit about kind of like continuing our conversation about the secondary, just where they go to replace him, what the loss of him is, if this is a crippling loss, something they can get through. So we'll talk about Marcus Williams and the plan for Baltimore to replace him in the first segment. In the second segment, though, there's been a lot of topic of conversation surrounding the Carolina Panthers, and I've kind of hinted at it throughout the week, talked about it a little bit, but I truly do want to dive into the conversation of should the Ravens trade for DJ Moore, or, we can talk Robby Anderson, Brian Burns, people on that Carolina roster right now who might look to get traded or who the organization might look to trade. So we'll talk about what benefits it would be to the Ravens to trade for DJ Moore or Robby Anderson or some of those guys, what DJ Moore would bring to the Ravens, what it would cost to acquire him, et cetera, and just what the case for and against DJ Moore in Baltimore is. And then in the final segment, I do want to get into a really good mailbag question about some concerns about this team moving forward, some offensive, some defenses, where the Ravens can look to improve moving forward. So we have a ton to talk about here today. I'm super excited to dive into it. If you are here with us in video form, though, thank you so much for tuning in. If you want to support the channel on YouTube, be sure to subscribe, like the video as well. It helps out a ton. Thank you so much to everybody who has already done that. If you're here with us in audio form, so Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, thank you as well. Be sure to follow along there, and be sure to follow me on Twitter at ChaosSharker34 and the Locked On Ravens account at Locked On Ravens. But let's dive into the conversation first surrounding Marcus Williams. Now, Williams was the Ravens' prized acquisition of free agency in 2022, right? 5 years, $70 million. The deal actually shocked me a little bit, not in a bad way. I was very pleasantly shocked, I would say, pleasantly surprised the Ravens went out there and gave a safety a big money deal shortly after the Ravens gave Earl Thomas the big money deal a couple of off seasons ago. Now, we all know how the Earl Thomas saga, I guess I'll call it, went. Was awesome on the field. Thomas was great in 2019 on the field. Off the field, it was an absolute disaster in multiple different ways. With Marcus Williams so far, he has demonstrated the ability to come into this Baltimore defense, into the Baltimore secondary, and show that he's a single high player. He can play in a multitude of different roles, but he can be that back end presence where he can cover a lot of ground, get to the football. We saw that in, I think it was week 2 against the Dolphins, where, he comes over, he screams over from his position, breaks up a football. He has 3 interceptions this year. Actually, he had 3 interceptions in his first 2 games, or even 6 quarters, I think it was, 1.5 games. The Ravens as a team last year had 9. And so Williams is accounting for almost half of Baltimore's interception total this year. Baltimore has 8 so far. It's a big loss. It is 100% a big loss. He's been one of the more consistent. In fact, you could honestly call him maybe the most consistent player on this defense, willing tackler. He's been everything and more the Baltimore envisioned when they signed him. and it has gone so well on the field, but a dislocated wrist that he suffered in week 5 does land him on IR. Now, when he went out of the game, and there was some clarity surrounding the injury, apparently he suffered the injury on the first or second drive, tried to gut it out, but then the Ravens, once they actually figured out, oh, this is serious, so once they figured out the severity of it, they obviously held him out. He was deemed doubtful to return in the game. Once he went out, it was Geno Stone who got a lot of run at that free safety position. And like he fits that profile. He's someone who has, I guess you could call it, bounced around. Not really, though. He played for the team, drafted by the Ravens in the 7th round and ended up being with the team, then getting cut, and then he was with the Texans for a little bit, then came back. So he's been in the system. He's learned this system. He knows it inside and out. But I know a lot of people are clamoring for, where's Kyle Hamilton? They have to put Kyle Hamilton in there. And I think we will see Kyle Hamilton play more than he did in week 5. I think now that you know that, hey, look, we're not going to have Marcus Williams. That's what the Ravens are saying to themselves right now is we don't have Marcus Williams. They don't want to just put it, I think, solely in the hands of Geno Stone. I think Geno Stone will get playing time. I still think that is definitely what they will do. But I think they do want to continue to roll with their safety rotations and being able to put Kyle Hamilton on the field, maybe play him up in the box a little bit. He can roam around too. But I think that Geno Stone, he does fill that free safety void. Another player to potentially watch what the Ravens do with is maybe Ardarius Washington. Does Washington get called up? Does he get a spot on the 53-man roster? He's someone who did play free safety and in his profiles is that free safety type player. He played that in college at TCU. I had a 3rd-round grade on him. He went undrafted. I was shocked and I was very surprised, and well, in a good way, again, very surprised that Baltimore was able to get him. And I was ecstatic Baltimore was able to get him. Now, it feels like Baltimore views him more as a slot corner, but he does have the positional versatility. Brandon Stevens has safety versatility. He played there obviously a lot last year, although I do 100% think Baltimore views him as a corner now, but maybe you rotate. And this is a defense. Look, this is not your typical, we're playing base 100% of the time defense if you're the Ravens defense. It's not what they do. It's not. They disguise looks. They put out 6 DBs. They play a bunch of different coverages. And I think for Williams, you want to have him on the field, right? Your first choice is Marcus Williams. I think that it is a huge loss, right? I'm not going to understate this and say, the Ravens secondary without Marcus Williams is just the same as it was with him. No, it is going to be different. A talent level that Marcus Williams, like the Geno Stone to Marcus Williams, or I guess Marcus Williams to Geno Stone talent drop off, it's there. It is there. But I have confidence in Geno Stone can at least hold down the fort. I mean, again, John Harbaugh saying this is not a season-ending injury. So you just got to hold down the fort. The way that Marlon Humphrey is playing right now, the way that Marcus Peters is playing right now, the secondary is beginning to find its stride. I think part of that absolutely had to do with Marcus Williams just being that steady presence on the field. But it's next man up. Injuries happen, and it's really unfortunate. I was really enjoying watching Marcus Williams play. He had those 2 super acrobatic, incredible interceptions against the Dolphins where he had the one where he was on the ground, like literally on the ground, and caught the ball, the second toe tap one where he didn't even think he got in, but he actually did get both feet down. So his impact is being felt. I think he's establishing himself as a leader on that defense, which I like to see. And again, we don't know the exact timeline right now. Well, we know the minimum timeline is going to be at least 4 games. But with the schedule Baltimore has coming up, I think that they can definitely be able to go through this period without Marcus Williams and still be okay. They obviously have Daniel Jones and the Giants coming up this week. Next week, they have Jacoby Brissett and those Cleveland Browns and a couple other decently easy quarterback matchups. Now, it is any given Sunday. You can't write off any team or any quarterback, any player in this league because it'll come back and it'll bite you. We've seen the Ravens win games they're supposed to lose and lose games they're supposed to win. It does go both ways for Baltimore. But I do think that this is a position, the safety position. We talked about the depth. We talked about it for the whole offseason. It was, wow, with Marcus Williams and Chuck Clark and Kyle Hamilton and Geno Stone. At the time, Tony Jefferson was in that conversation too. They have depth on depth on depth. And now you kind of replace Tony Jefferson with, I guess it's Ardarius Washington in this situation. Maybe they go out there and sign a veteran. I don't think they will. I think they'll rely on their young guys. Maybe they do. Maybe I'm wrong there, but this is not a traditional defense. I think Baltimore will be okay without Marcus Williams. There is a talent drop off. It is a big, big loss. It's a big loss, but I do think at the end of the day, they will be okay. But we'll head into our first break now. Coming up here on Locked On Ravens, we're going to be discussing DJ Moore, Robby Anderson, some of those Carolina Panthers players, and if the Ravens should make a move for them or not. So be sure to stay tuned. We still have a ton to talk about here on the show. Now a word from our sponsor, BetterHelp. And there are plenty of times where people can get stuck focusing on problems instead of solutions. And sometimes those situations can go much better with a different mindset. It can be really tough to train your brain to stay in problem-solving mode when faced with a challenge in life. When you learn how to find your own solutions, there is no better feeling. A therapist can help you become a better problem solver, making it easier to accomplish your goals, no matter how big or how small. And therapy can be a really good way to be able to train your brain to stay in that problem solving mode. And there's a lot of different reasons why people do try therapy. It can make you less stressed, more confident. It can make you feel like yourself. And if you're thinking about giving therapy a try, BetterHelp is a great option. It's convenient, accessible, affordable, and entirely online. You can get matched with a therapist after filling out a brief survey and switch therapists at any time. When you want to be a better problem solver, therapy can get you there. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off of your first month. That's BetterHelp.com/lockedon. We are back here, our second segment of Locked On Ravens here on this Wednesday. Kevin Oestreicher, your host, still here with you. And we're not going to be diving into some trade conversation. The trade deadline isn't approaching yet. We're getting there slowly, but there has been some trade rumblings recently, and I think it's important to talk about. The Panthers firing Matt Rule on Monday, and there was a lot of conversation surrounding some of their star players, Christian McCaffrey, DJ Moore, Brian Burns, etc. Now, the star name that has been most linked to the Ravens, I would say, based off of people wanting him in Baltimore and the fit and whatnot, is DJ Moore. And the ability for Baltimore to bring in a DJ Moore, we'll talk about that in a couple minutes. But just the player that DJ Moore is, we've talked for months and months and months about should the Ravens bring in a true number one receiver, trade for, sign, even draft. But I think most of the conversation has been surrounding trades recently, talking about DK Metcalf and Deebo Samuel and some of those guys. Obviously, the conversation does span further than that. There are more names, but DJ Moore would be that number one star wide receiver that you could bring into Baltimore, and I think would have a huge impact in the mid, late, and even playoff stages, Super Bowl even stages of the year for Baltimore. Now, some background on Moore. He is a Maryland guy, went to the University of Maryland. You could bring him home if you're Baltimore. He's 6 foot, 210 pounds, and over the course of his career so far, 318 catches, 4,510 yards, and 15 touchdowns. Is having a bit of a down year this year, but the quarterback play in Carolina has been awful. Baker Mayfield has been horrendous. I think this week PJ Walker is going to end up starting for them since Sam Darnold's still on IR. So there has been a lot of free DJ Moore campaigns across the league. It's not just for Baltimore, but I do think it makes sense for the Ravens to go out there and acquire somebody like DJ Moore. I think DJ Moore would be the swing for the fences type deal. Moore did sign an extension with Carolina. And so this year, and again, how trades work is the base salary is what comes over. This year, DJ Moore's base salary is $1.035 million. So it's not a big financial commitment for this year. But moving forward, he has $19 million, $15 million, and $14 million base salaries. So that will be where the Ravens would have to either restructure or do some other stuff to make him fit into their plans. But I think that, again, when you're talking about acquiring a star wide receiver, they're all going to – I think that is somewhat of a bargain for DJ Moore, in my opinion, based off of what we have seen wide receivers get over the course of the 2022 offseason. And I think the price is going to continue to go up for these guys. So I think for DJ Moore, that is a bargain, even though, you're saying, 19 million, 15 million. He's 25 right now. So he's still young. He kind of fits the timeline, I think. So I think it would be a no-brainer. But there are a couple of things, and we did talk about the contract, but another thing would be, what would Carolina want in return capital-wise? Players, picks, etc. I think that you're probably looking at giving up a first for DJ Moore. If you're lucky, if you're Baltimore, maybe a second. I would in a heartbeat give up a second for DJ Moore. DJ Moore is what you want a second-round pick to be. DJ Moore is what you want a first-round pick to be. Moore was a first-round pick in the 2018 draft. I know many many people wanted the Ravens to draft him over Hayden Hurst in that draft. And I know there were a couple others. Derwin James is kind of the one that people go to. But DJ Moore was another. Calvin Ridley, another one of those players. But I think that Moore, he would fit in. I mean, he's someone who is not going to burn you with speed or anything, but he is a solid route runner, has solid hands. He's an all-around really solid player. And he is that star wide receiver. I think he's just not as recognized of a player as some of these other star wideouts. And I think part of that has had to do with his quarterback play. You put him in this offense next to Lamar Jackson. Is this one of the more dynamic passing offenses in the league right now? Actually, yeah, it kind of is. Like the Ravens right now are a passing offense. And I know it hasn't really been on display over the past couple of games, but Lamar Jackson, I think, has had his best year so far, even though the last two games against Buffalo and Cincinnati have not been amazing. So if you put a player like DJ Moore in that offense next to Lamar Jackson, you have Rashad Bateman, Devin Duvernay, Mark Andrews. Oh, that's a deadly offense. I'll tell you that much. And I think when you're talking about the other aspect of this whole thing, which I have gotten into a bit this week on previous shows, but where the Ravens are wide receiver wise right now, you've had Rashad Bateman step up. You've had Devin Duvernay step up. But now we see Rashad Bateman go out, and everybody moves up a step. And Devin Duvernay becomes number one, Demarcus Robinson number two, James Prochet, Tylan Wallace, etc. I think you just need a little more depth there, because if Devin Duvernay went down, and of course, hopefully he does not, but if Devin Duvernay went down and Rashad Bateman is still out, then that means everyone moves up again, and then Demarcus Robinson becomes your number one, and then James Prochet, so et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And look, for Tylan Wallace, to his credit, he should have had a touchdown on Sunday night, right? So I think the receivers, the young ones, still have the ability to produce, but the talent level of DJ Moore, if he is available, and the Ravens can go out there and get him, like I am absolutely 100% trading a second for DJ Moore, 1,000%. A first, like I'd even consider a first, but the way the Ravens have done business, I would say, and what we have seen the trend, I would doubt they would give up a first. Maybe Eric DeCosta breaks this trend. He sees that this team is close and he's like, look, we're going to do this. This is the year to go all in. Maybe it happens, but we will see. I think a more realistic option would be Robby Anderson, who was another receiver over there. Definitely expressed some unhappiness before Baker Mayfield got to Carolina about the potential of Baker Mayfield going to Carolina. So funny how that works out. Anderson this year has a $1.035 million base salary, which is actually the exact same number as DJ Moore. But then he has $8.8 million in 2023. He's an undrafted or unrestricted, free agent in 2024. So 2 years, less than 2 years left on that deal. Get him for this year. You can get him for next year. You can even get out of the deal if you wanted to before next year. You would only save around, I believe it would be $4 million. Or no, it'd be more than that. You'd be able to get out and save $13 million, it looks like, around. So that would be solid if you're the Ravens. But so you can have him for one, you can have him for two. But Robby Anderson, he's a 6'3", 190-pound player. So you got a little size there if you're Robby Anderson at that 6'3". Over the course of his career, 368 catches, 4,880 yards, 29 touchdowns. And he's someone who, again, not this DJ Moore star, but maybe the more realistic option. You can give the Panthers a fourth or a fifth, and you would be able to get Robby Anderson on the team. So maybe that's the more realistic option. Brian Burns is another player that has been linked. Well, I wouldn't say linked. I would say people want Brian Burns in Baltimore. I think that, though, with Tyus Bowser coming back, David Ojabo hopefully coming back at some point, you're okay there. I mean, Brian Burns is phenomenal. Also, he's on his fifth-year option next year. So a big extension does come with that for a couple more years of having him on a decently cheap contract. That's another aspect to look at. But over the course of his career, 29.5 sacks through just over 3 seasons, 7.5 his rookie year, 9 in both his second and third seasons, already up to 4 in 5 games so far this year. Brian Burns is incredibly talented, but I don't know if the Ravens are giving up that draft capital when they have guys like Tyus Bowser and David Ojabo coming back, but it would be a needle-moving move, so I won't necessarily rule it out, but I feel like if they were to go DJ Moore versus Brian Burns, I think they would maybe go for DJ Moore more than others. Others, I've seen Shaq Thompson. Definitely wouldn't hate that move. I also don't think it would cost them a ton of money to get him, and I also don't think it costs a ton of draft capital, so maybe you look there. Carolina has a ton. Christian McCaffrey, I don't think is an option right now. I wouldn't see Baltimore making that move. right now. I mean, they have J.K. Dobbins, Gus Edwards is coming back. It would make a heck of a running back room, I'll tell you that, with McCaffrey, Dobbins, and Edwards. Man, who's stopping that? But I think they would use their assets in other places. So I think the most realistic option right now would be Robby Anderson. I think if you're looking for more of a star dream scenario that would, I think, fit perfectly, I think DJ Moore is your guy. So long story short, should the Ravens trade for DJ Moore? Yeah, absolutely. I think the Ravens should trade for DJ Moore. I think if you can get him for a second, you can kind of work that price down a little bit. The only thing would be, can they restructure the contract? Because with the Lamar Jackson extension, hopefully on the horizon at some point, you would have to figure out a way to be able to keep a player like DJ Moore. But again, he's not even getting paid $20 million once. He's getting paid just under $20 million next year. You have the 15 and the 14. I still think that's a bargain. I think it's a bargain for a player like DJ Moore. So I put me aboard the DJ Moore train. I am all on board the DJ Moore to Baltimore, bringing him home to Maryland. We'll see what the Ravens do, though, coming up here as the trade deadline does slowly approach here a little bit. When we get back here, though, for our final segment on Locked On Ravens, we are going to be diving into a mailbag question, talking about some concerns for this team where the Ravens can get better moving forward. So be sure to stay tuned. We do still have a ton to talk about here on the show. First, though, I do want to tell you a bit about BetOnline. And BetOnline.net is your number one source for football betting info this season. You can find all the latest player developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, and in-depth articles and analysis on every game you can find. And as always, BetOnline remains your continued source for all your sports wagering information with live betting and up-to-the-minute scores for every sport out there. It's the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite games and events, including MLB, MMA, boxing, and golf. Head to the BetOnline.net website or use a mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. We're back here with our final segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher, your host, still here with you again. Thank you so much for tuning in, making us your first listen of the day here. Now we're going to be talking about a mailbag question that we got for today's show. It's only one, but I will be able to make it a full segment. So I'm actually really excited about this one. It comes from Afida Foy, and the question is, hi, Kevin, after 5 games, what is your main concern regarding the offense and regarding the defense? Thanks for the show and have a nice day. As always, you have a nice day too, of course. And there are concerns when it comes to the Ravens. Obviously, I think the biggest one is the fact that you point to a couple reasons of, why aren't the Ravens 5-0 right now? Why aren't the Ravens 4-1 right now? A big aspect of that is the blown leads and the big plays given up by the defense. They've done a really good job of not doing that recently. Well, I'll say they did a good job on Sunday night against Cincinnati of not doing that. Big plays were non-existent. Joe Burrow was ineffective. But I think when with a concern, we'll do defense then offense. Defensively, I still think it is the run game. Baltimore's rush defense right now definitely has some problems. They're allowing running backs to gash them on the ground. It really became super noticeable starting in week 3 when Damian Harris just gashed them for big play after big play after big play. In week 4, it wasn't as noticeable, but it was still definitely there. And then in week 5, Joe Mixon comes into town averaging 2.7 yards per carry. The Bengals as a team averaging 3.1 yards per carry. That's the second to last mark in the league, 31st in the NFL. And the Ravens give up 4.8 yards per carry to Joe Mixon. It was not what you wanted to see. And I think when looking at where the Ravens need to get better, I'll say where they have gotten better is in the secondary. Where I think they need to get better is in the run game. Losing Michael Pierce was a super, super big blow. He was playing really, really, really well, and he gets injured, and now we're starting to see the run defense fall apart a little bit. So guys like Justin Madubuike, Travis Jones, Broderick Washington need to step up and make sure they're able to engage with these offensive linemen. Don't let them get to the second level. It's important for the linebackers to be able to roam free when you have an offensive lineman in your face every play, blowing up the linebacker's ability to get to the ball carrier. It hurts, it hurts. And the Ravens have given up gashing plays. And the Ravens, I believe right now, their rushing defense is 26th in the league total, while their secondary, their passing defense has moved up to 21st. So we're seeing improvement one way, but regression the other way. And the Ravens run defense last year was great. They were a top 5, top 2, top 1 unit in plenty of categories, but defensively, I think it's definitely the run defense. When you're talking about offense, there are some lingering concerns, I would say. about the run game, but it has gotten and I'll say outside Lamar Jackson, but it has gotten on track. We saw Justice Hill do his thing. He went out. J.K. Dobbins looks like J.K. Dobbins again, so I'm not necessarily concerned there. But where are the Ravens going to be able to get their yards outside of Lamar Jackson and J.K. Dobbins? Can Kenyon Drake do the job? Can Mike Davis do the job? Do you put Devin Duvernay back there as well? That's where I'm looking and seeing. And I also think you can kind of have the extension of the run game be some of these screen passes. I think the Ravens should run some screen passes. I would love it if the Ravens could run some screen passes. That'd be really, it'd be fun. I think it'd be effective also. The Ravens ran a bunch of ineffective screens last season. We saw an effective one against the Jets in week 1, and everyone was like, oh my God, this is the best thing ever. So I think they should definitely run some screens. But yeah, just where are they getting their ground production outside of Lamar Jackson and J.K. Dobbins? That is the main thing. I think the pass offense still looks pretty good, but a concern, I guess, would be if Rashad Bateman is still unable to go for a couple of weeks. Can the other receivers step up? We've seen Devin Duvernay do it. That's not a concern. But can DeMarcus Robinson get separation? Can James Prochet get separation? Tyler Wallace? There are a lot of things to like about this team as they continue to settle in. The offensive line has looked great, all things considered. Like I've been very impressed. Usually, we talked about this time last year, I think the offensive line would have been near the top of the list offensively concern-wise. It has been very, very refreshing, I think, to see an offensive line group that just looks competent. I guess I'll say competent because it just did not look that at times with so many offensive line combinations. Ravens getting Ronnie Stanley back is huge. And I think they're doing well in the run game blocking-wise as well. I think the pass protection has been phenomenal for Lamar Jackson also. So I know it was a question about concerns, but the concerns weave into the strengths and the strengths weave into the concerns. So it does kind of go both ways there. So I'll say it's really run. It's a run-centric concern thing for me, where the run defense, I think, for Baltimore has to improve with Saquon Barkley coming to town. Or I guess the Ravens are going there, but with the Ravens going into town to face Saquon Barkley, it's going to be important for them to shut that down, make Daniel Jones beat them. The Giants have the last ranked passing offense in the NFL. Get there. Make the Giants do that instead of run the ball with Saquon, who's looked amazing this year. And then on offense, be able to get some yards outside of Dobbins and Jackson, because you're relying on guys like Kenyon Drake and Mike Davis to do that until Gus Edwards comes back. I think once Edwards comes back, he will be fine. Like that'll be, and then everything is a-okay. And once Dobbins gets off the pitch count, he looks ready. By the way, he looks ready to kind of shed that pitch count. I know he wants to be out there. He's a competitor, but for me, there are just so many different areas where I think Baltimore has settled in compared to what we saw over the first couple of weeks. And that's it with all teams. There are those early season overreactions and concerns about, oh, this is going to be the whole year, when they're really 1 or 2 or 3 or even a month into the year. But again, I'll go back to the secondary. That's an area where I think they've settled in. I think the offensive line has settled in. I think some of these players also have settled in. Devin Duvernay settled in very nicely to his role. We're starting to see guys like Tyler Linderbaum settle in really nicely. I think Kyle Hamilton is one of those guys as well. So yeah, there aren't necessarily big concerns for me right now, because I think this team is better than their record. They should be. I'll say they should be 4-1 right now. They honestly should be 5-0, but I'm going to say they should be 4-1 right now based off of a couple decisions here, some big plays there. So I do think they're better than the record. They're not a perfect football team. They're not. No team is. But I still think that they have the talent to, over these next couple of weeks, especially the next 2 with the Giants and Cleveland, win those 2 games and establish a decently sized lead for themselves. And if they can put together these run game concerns that I have both on offense and on defense, like, look, the rushing offense on paper for Baltimore looks great because of Jackson and because of Dobbins, right? Jackson has been their offense this year. Jackson's been great. But can you get other production to take some of the load off of those 2 guys, even if it is just 5 or 6 or 7 carries? I think that's maybe all you need to be able to give these guys just to take a little bit of the load off of their shoulders. Then defensively, if you're able to shut down the run game, what the secondary Baltimore has, super huge recipe for success. You just can't have those big gashing plays. I'll give one more concern for defense. I'll say missed tackles are somewhat of a concern for me in some areas. Now, it's not as egregious as it was last year at this time. Last year, it was really bad. Really bad. But this year, it comes in spurts, but every time there's a missed tackle, the guy goes for like 5 or 6 or 7 more yards. I know I've talked about this before, but I'd like to see them just shore that tackling up a little bit over the course of these next couple of weeks, because I think it has harmed them in multiple ways. And it's been a whole year thing where they're not missing every single tackle, but when they do miss a tackle here or there, it happens multiple times per game. And the guy does gain multiple yards that gives the opposing offense an advantage. So those are my concerns. I would say not a ton of huge ones, definitely very fixable. I think the miscommunication concern has gone down for me since the I'll say the Dolphins game. Well, actually, I'll say Patriots games that when the miscommunications were huge, but that's died down a little bit for me. I think that the big plays have also died down a little bit as well over these past couple of weeks, so that's good. But fix the run game. Well, I'll say figure out the run game on offense and on defense. I think this team will be golden. But that's all I have for you here today on Locked On Ravens. Thank you so much for tuning in. When we get back here tomorrow, we'll be starting to preview the Ravens Week 6 matchup with the New York Giants on Crossover Thursday. So be sure to stay tuned for that, and I will see you right back here tomorrow.